Hi, my name is Kyle Wiggs with Exact Strategies. We're going to go through a PowerPoint presentation that's intended to be delivered to more of a group audience setting, whether it be clients or prospects, to help them understand what Exact Strategies technology is helping you do within your individual portfolios. We're going to talk about two different modes. We're going to talk about our alpha mode technology, where you're using quantitative analysis to help you make buy-sell recommendations objectively in your portfolio. And then we'll talk about the beta mode asset allocation, which, as you know, is a series of portfolios using quantitative analysis really to observe volatility and ensure that we never violate a client's risk budget. So as you begin the conversation, think about how technology has evolved since the 1950s. This is a picture of one of the original computers. It's the size of a 3-car garage and doesn't carry the same computing power as a lot of the smartphones do today. And the reality is, if you walk back through the decades and think about from the first computer being created in the 50s all the way through, them not becoming more accessible until the mid to late 80s, to think of today, ask any kid today, Google it, has just become part of our everyday language. And as we continue to move towards cloud computing and all the amazing inventions and enhancements to our lifestyle have in large part come through the result of technology. And the problem is our industry, as we ask the question here, our investments, is financial services keeping pace with the rest of the way that we live our lives? And I think the answer is ultimately no. And so we'll use this periodic table of elements to sort of display that. So if we think about traditional asset allocation, we're looking at returns of the 6 major asset classes from 2008 through 2018. Most firms will tell you, look here, we've highlighted U.S. equities in this particular case, down 37% in 2008 and up, as much as 32% in 2013. And most firms will have you or convince you to believe that because returns are so random, that at the end of the day, you need to buy a predetermined percentage of all of these and hold them for hopefully long enough so that things work out for you. And that's something that we and you, through the adoption of our technology, fundamentally reject. So let's talk about why. So in a study published by BlackRock, they took the return series and they contrasted that with the risk or the standard deviation of those corresponding asset classes. And the point that they were trying to make to reinforce this idea of essentially justifying why they believe buy and hold is appropriate for clients is that on the left-hand side of the screen, as you can see, we've got a really sort of random disbursement of calendar year returns by asset class. But in terms of the actual sort of volatility associated with those, on a relative basis, they don't really change hands all that often. But that somewhat misses the point. How many of you in the audience, by a show of hands, would want to own almost a quarter of your, say, retirement account in international equity, which was down 43 in 2008, with a really, really high degree of risk, standard deviation of 27? Probably not a lot of folks in the room are interested in that. And by contrast, if we flip that argument on its head, how many of you would want to restrict your ability to own international equity when it's up 25% with a really, really low standard deviation or risk score of 4.2? Therein lies the point of our industry falling behind. These are 10 portfolios recommended by Vanguard. Vanguard would have you believe that the only thing that matters is cost. We believe that cost matters in the absence of value. And so we're referencing here at the top a study asking the question, if 10 years from now, we were going over your portfolio and doing a sort of an annual review and we were looking back over the prior 10 years, if I said to you, you have accomplished 0.5% in your portfolio per year on average after inflation, how many of you would define that as successful? Probably not many clients in the room would define that as successful and probably wouldn't have stayed with you for the entire 10-year period. And the point of that is PIMCO, in partnership with Research Affiliates, did a study where they actually did just that. They looked at a 60-40 traditional strategic asset allocation model, and they said, what should the typical 60-40 portfolio expect to achieve after inflation over the next decade? And it's 0.5%. And so I don't think clients have the ability to sort of recover from a decade of only returning 0.5%. So the question is, what can an investor do? Well, there's two things. Let's talk about the first. In those Vanguard models, this is the 60-40 allocation that they're recommending. Back to the study that we looked at a couple of slides ago, they believe, regardless of what the markets are doing, you should always own 23.5% in international equity. And that every year, when the calendar hits January, that because it's January and not December, you should rebalance your portfolio, potentially taking from investment classes that are doing well, only to reduce our exposure to those to buy things that are potentially not doing as well. In our beta mode series, which we'll explore later, we use technology similar to cruise control to establish a risk budget. And as the volatility, think back to the prior slide, when international equity goes from a risk score of 27 down to 4, why not take advantage of that? Why not adjust to that? Perhaps more importantly is if the standard deviation or risk score in your portfolio triples, say from 2017 to 18, which it did, does it make sense to own the exact same percentage? And we don't think that it does. And in our other portfolios, which are really well suited for qualified accounts and clients that are looking to grow that portfolio, our alpha mode technology is forcing investment companies, parts of the world, large cap stocks and small cap stocks, stocks and bonds to compete against each other and objectively recommend, based upon the current conditions of the market, where is the best place that I can allocate capital today. So let's start with the alpha mode, which forces these investment ideas to compete against one another to earn a spot in your portfolio. So we talked about earlier, what we do is we combine, like Google Maps, data with technology to seek productivity and safety. The goal of our technology, we don't think anyone has the ability to choose the top row of every asset class every year. That's an unrealistic expectation. But what we want to do is we want to think about, can we avoid some of the really, really bad places to invest? And if that means we have to take on cash as an example because nothing is working, we think that a flat line is better than a declining line. And so if we can live in this middle ground of sort of durable, productive investments, rather than at the same time avoiding some of the more toxic ones, we know the potential impact that can have long-term on an investor. So how do we do it? Well, the first step, which every advisor should be doing, is to sit down with you to understand, why are you investing to begin with? And once we do that, then we want to put you through a risk tolerance to understand, okay, we know what the goal is. We understand what your time frame is. Now what we want to understand is, how much risk are you willing to assume to get there? These are table stakes. Every advisor in the country who has a fiduciary obligation is doing these on clients' behalf. And so we're really going to expand upon those two steps. In step 3, if you think about the universe of investments today, there are tens of thousands of options, from mutual funds to ETFs, stocks to bonds, US to international. Where do you even begin? Therein lies why most advisors do what they do. They meet with product specialists who sponsor events, and as a quid pro quo, they then in turn recommend those investments into your portfolios, and we reject that. We use technology that runs through 1.2 million calculations and can give you thousands of combinations every day, forcing these companies to compete. And so we're going to go out to the universe and we're going to choose an optimal set of investments to expose our technology to, based upon your goals, based upon your risk tolerance, and based upon your investment objective. And once we do that and we establish the universe that we need to choose from, we're going to monitor it every day. Not once a year, not when we feel like it. Every single day, the technology is going to observe the investments in your portfolio. When we do that, we're going to do one thing inside of the alpha portfolios. We're going to assign a composite score. That composite score is observing 7 different characteristics. How well are my investments doing when the market's up? How well are my investments doing when the market's down? And based upon that, it is going to objectively recommend where is the best place to allocate my client's capital based upon what's happening in the markets now. Not what we think will happen 6 months from now, not what happened 6 months ago, based on the current conditions available to us. So what does that look like? Well, here's a sample portfolio. I mentioned earlier that each portfolio goes through 1.2 million calculations, which is the power of technology, and in doing so has the ability to give you thousands of different combinations of possible portfolios based upon current conditions. So it might look something like this. If you think about, say, an income portfolio, on the left-hand side of our screen, think of from cash as the least risky option, all the way up to international dividend stocks in this portfolio as a sample as the most risky option. And then think of each piece of a portfolio as having kind of an aggressive, a middle ground, a defensive, and a cash option. The technology at the end of every day is going to run the analysis, and it's going to ask the question, where's the best place to invest? And 2 to 3 times a month, you will actually see the portfolio adjust where it currently is allocated. To be clear, while it measures every day, it doesn't trade every day. Additionally, the products that we choose, that we optimize and expose the portfolio and technology to, trade ticket free. So we don't have concerns around turnover or ticket charges in the portfolio. And so in this particular example, if you think of these are all of the options, what does it currently hold? And this can change 2 to 3 times per month to the point where you could, throughout the course of a year, have dozens, if not hundreds of possible combinations. And why is that important? Think about your daily commute for those of you that live in, more congested areas. You may have 2 to 3 options to get, from home to the office every day. And each day could present a unique challenge, whether it's weather driven or whether there's accidents or heavier traffic or road construction. And using modern day technology, we can actually ask the question, what time do I need to leave? And what is the best route for me to take today? And that really is the idea that we're taking with this technology inside of your portfolios. So what would that have looked like in a sample portfolio? Let me explain what you're looking at here. So what we have here, all of these asset classes on the left do not represent the performance of our portfolios. They represent the broad indices that you see. So small cap growth as an index was up 7.05% in 2007. The S&P was up 5.49. This pie chart represents a sample portfolio and potentially how it might adjust as the markets are sort of changing, whether they be declining or going up. And so down below, you have the daily price. This blue line represents the S&P 500. This gray bar represents this date that you see in the upper left-hand corner. And what you'll notice is as we move forward in time, the portfolio using the technology has the ability to observe and react. So as we move forward to the third quarter of 2007, you can see the portfolio has fundamentally changed. As we move to the fourth quarter of 2007, as we move into 2008, you start to see a couple of things change. Number one is the S&P 500 for that year as an index was down 37%. And so as we get closer to when things started to get relatively and materially volatile in the second, third, and fourth quarters of 2008, what you'll see is a portfolio that has moved into 3 things: cash, fixed income, and some more conservative regional bank stocks. And it will hold that position until things start to slowly recover, and you can see where we start to step out of cash, somewhat out of fixed income, into things like utilities, which are durable, and international and precious metals. And so this gives you an idea of the potential of where we want to use the technology to observe what's going on in the markets, and we want to give it the ability to adjust. We don't want to create a predetermined allocation that forces us to hold those investments regardless of what the markets are doing. So let's talk about beta mode. Beta mode for clients tends to be used for clients that have taxable accounts, clients that are taking a distribution. These portfolios, unlike the alpha portfolios, don't have the ability to get to cash. What they do is they really act as your portfolio's cruise control. So if we come back to the study by BlackRock, now we really want to focus more on the right-hand side, the risk side, if you will, of the equation, as opposed to the return side. So back to the international equities example, if in the Vanguard instance, nearly a quarter of our money is running with a standard deviation of 27, and it drops to 4, that has a material impact on the overall risk profile of the portfolio. More importantly, I think for clients that are in distribution phase and perhaps in retirement or looking for a more conservative investment, if we flip that and we went from 4 to 27, that could be problematic. If we think about 2017 to 2018, we really nearly tripled the amount of risk that we had in that particular investment. And so that's where we want to use our technology to optimize the client's risk budget and ensure we don't violate it. So there's 2 ways to think about this. As we've talked about, sort of that cruise control analogy, set the speed, let the technology take over, and that gives us the confidence that we're not going to get into an accident and we're not going to get a ticket. Another way to think about it is in terms of family planning and sort of personal budgeting. If you think of your own personal budget, whatever the number is, let's say it's $3,000 a month, that monthly budget has multiple line items, whether it's utilities or dining out, or whether it's food, whether it's gas, entertainment. As we all know, different times of year, different parts of our budget actually take a larger percentage. So as that occurs, we have to adjust accordingly. If we go into the holiday season where dining out and gifts become a larger part of the budget, we have to sort of dial back in other areas. If in the summer months our utilities are higher, we have to think about where do we sort of take from in order to accommodate that. Think of that in terms of what this technology is doing. It is assuming a budget, that budget is risk, and as conditions continuously change, back to the Vanguard example, it will adjust your portfolio accordingly so that we as your advisor can have confidence that we don't violate your budget. So if you think about all of this, we have so many advancements. Think about the advancements technology has brought to medicine. A doctor on one side of the country can actually operate on a patient on the entire opposite side of the country. There are so many amazing technological advances that have really, really empowered the way we live our everyday life. Our question as your advisor is, why aren't your investment companies doing the same thing? With technology coming so far, shouldn't your investments? That's why we've invested in this technology, and we're very excited to sit down and show it with you individually.